I'm Jody Burnett,
And I'm Jennifer Southall.
and we're priests and pastors at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Oxford, Mississippi.
Our goal with this podcast is to lift up voices from within our community and from around the wider church, and to feature stories of joy, hope, and encouragement for your journey of faith.
We're delighted to welcome you to On This Rock for the building up of the church. We pray this episode will be a blessing to our listeners. Welcome back to our listeners to our fourth episode of On This Rock, the St. Peter's podcast. It is Thursday in Easter week, and I am filled with great joy and excitement after a wonderful celebration of Easter, Holy Week and Easter here at St. Peter's, and I am so grateful for the faith and the commitment of this community. So grateful to be a part of this place. And so in the spirit of that faith and gratitude and joy, I'm especially excited to welcome as our guest Merrill McCaleb, who is a clinical therapist at the Oxford Treatment Center. We're going to talk today about accountability, accountability in Christian community, accountability in our lives, accountability before God. And Laura Merrill came to mind, especially because of her work. So Laura Merrill, we're delighted to have you. I'd love for you first, before we kind of launch into that conversation, just introduce yourself, tell our listeners about who you are, how long you've been at St. Peter's, where you've come from, what you do, anything along those lines. We'd love to hear about it.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm excited about this. So, yes, name is Laura Merrill, one of those crazy Southern double names, originally from Greenville, Mississippi. So born and raised in the Mississippi Delta. Lived Greenville, Greenwood, Cleveland, kind of did the tour of the Delta until I landed here probably 6 years ago in July. So I've been in Oxford since then, been with Oxford Treatment Center for 5 years this summer. Backgrounds in social work, bachelor's in social work, master's in social work, prior to working in the field of addiction recovery and substance abuse. I worked with community mental health based in the high school. Before that, I did a lot of work kind of in some different spots around the Delta with Jerry Psych. So lots of different things. Swore I'd never do Jerry Psych, swore I'd never work with addiction. I've now done both. So I've trying to never say never anymore. But yeah, been in Oxford for a while, been at St. Peter's since I moved here, and really got committed to attending when my son was about 13, 14 months old, went through a divorce at that time, and found a lot of comfort in coming to church and the community there. So super grateful for the community of St. Peter's. Been kind of hanging out in that back right pew for a long time now. So grateful for the community and just kind of grateful for St. Peter's.
Laura Merrill, in thinking about your work and your involvement with addiction and recovery and with geriatric psychology and serving in a helping role, a supportive role, I think what we've realized as we've moved through this podcast is that people's faith plays a great role in their vocation. And so how did you sort of discover your call to mental health work in general, and how does your faith impact that work now on an ongoing basis?
Yes, it's weird. Like a lot of stuff in my life, this work that I found has kind of been a happy accident, maybe. Kind of I've always been guided, which is super cool to be able to look back and see. But like I said earlier, I never wanted to work in substance abuse, just, for a lot of different reasons. And randomly got an email one day from like LinkedIn, the job site, and said, "Hey, we're looking for therapists. Why don't you interview?" So I interviewed, and it just felt right, and it just kept feeling right. And then as I got kind of into the rhythm and into the routine and learned a little bit more about the world of recovery, it just continued to feel more right. So it wasn't necessarily like a bolt of lightning, burning bush, this is what I'm called to do. It just was kind of a little nudging, like, go this way. And then I kept, not separate, but didn't really think a whole lot about how my faith played into it, other than I think it's good to help. I think I was put here to help. I think that's something that's just always made sense to me. But in the last probably year and a half, probably since, everything with the pandemic and COVID and everything just kind of calming down and shutting down, I've had the opportunity to do a really wonderful deep dive into 12 steps, into different 12-step programs, and kind of learning more about that. And I was blown away at kind of how that shone a light on the areas in my own spiritual life that were lacking, for honestly lack of a better word. And so, kind of coming out of this last, year and a half, I've been kind of gifted this whole new way of looking at connection and healing and calling and, accountability and, relying on a power greater than myself, which I had always done, but never realized how important that was and how meaningful that was. So it's like I said, it's never really been kind of this is what I was put here to do, until I realized that it was. I don't know if that makes any sense, but Anne Lamott writes in one of her books, like, that lily pads always have appeared for her. And it's kind of felt like that for me. Like I've just always kind of been like, okay, I guess I'll try this. And luckily this has just all been really, it's given me more than I've given it.
So we looked at several different passages of scripture that relate, I think, maybe indirectly to the theme of accountability, but they talk about the importance of Christian community and people being together in community. And I think if there was one lesson that we've learned over the past year being apart, is that we so desperately need and we so heavily rely upon our communities to keep us grounded. And in Scripture, Paul especially talks a lot about the need for community to help to share joy and to help to bear burdens and to encourage and to direct and to discern, but also to, when necessary, speak the truth in love and to help bring people kind of back in line. And so thinking of accountability in that way, thinking of community in that way, how do you see that take shape in your work, first of all? And secondly, you've described this sort of movement in your personal life. How has that taken shape in your own personal life, in your spiritual journey?
Sure. So with the work stuff, I always think back to one of my mentors told me, like, years and years and years ago, or introduced this concept of like firm loving. And she was talking about with parenting and kind of working with parents and working with teenagers, especially, how can you kind of create this feeling, this idea of firm loving? And so that's something that I think about a lot in my work. Like, so many people wind up, not just in treatment, but wind up, whether it's with a therapist or with a doctor, like they wind up with us just like beat down from life and just so sad and so angry and so, hopeless, and, everything just feels terrible. So the first thing that I learned was the first thing that I learned when I started to work in this field was the best thing that I can do, the most helpful thing that I can do in the beginning is just hold space and just sit with and, get the thirsty people water and take people for walks and just, that encouragement. Like there's nothing, when someone is at what they feel like is the end of their rope or their rock bottom or whatever you want to call it, there's nothing that you can say that's going to help. I think back to times in my life that have been the hardest. There's nothing that anybody that could say that would help, but, being able to sit with and say, tell me your story, tell me what's important, tell me, just tell me about yourself, that's the way that I found to encourage. And then from that place, I've found it's a little bit easier to enter into that part of the firm loving. So, you've told me your story and you've told me about this heartbreak and you've told me what you want to be different. Now, what are some things that we can begin to do to get you to different, to get you to where you want to be, whether it's, saving your marriage or, being reunited with your kids or getting your health back? Like what what are some things that you can begin to do differently here and now today that are manageable and attainable and specific? How can we get there? And then how can I help you to learn how to be accountable to yourself? Because that whole idea of, for so many people that I work with, the idea of accountability and responsibility is shame-based, it's punitive, it's uncomfortable. They've had people their entire lives saying, you mess everything up. What is wrong with you? Why can't you just do X, Y, or Z? And if other people haven't told them that, then they've at least been telling themselves that. So again, I think about it as kind of like levels and layers. We hold space, we sit with, we like explore options, what can you do differently? And then how can you begin to do that for yourself? I love the concept of self-esteem comes from esteemable acts. And so kind of figuring out what I need to do different, and then how can I do that differently? And then having someone that's like, okay, you said you wanted to, write that letter. Did you write it? Come in my office, let's write it. Let's eat Reese's cups and listen to music and write that letter. So kind of figuring out like what the person needs, but also knowing that I can't do that for them. And that's another part of the thing that I've learned in this work is oftentimes in the past, my help has not been very helpful. So how can I begin to take responsibility for the way that I help and make sure that it is spiritually based, and make sure that it is kind, and make sure that it is like not my ego and not like, ooh, I have this therapeutic intervention that in my mind is going to be beautiful. Well, if that's not for them, then how can I just make sure that I'm helping in a way that's kind and compassionate?
What about in your own life?
Ooh, so in my own life, I think it's really easy for me to talk about the ways that I am like good at holding myself accountable. Like I'm really good at working through to-do lists, and I'm really good at making sure that I exercise 3 days a week. And I'm really good at, all of these like check off the boxes accountability. I'm a single parent, so I'm really good at making sure all the trash gets taken out. I'm really good at making sure all the stuff gets done because it's just me. But the thing that I have found, again, this is kind of related to the last year or so, the thing that I found more helpful is when I'm bring other people into my accountability. And when I make sure that I am letting people into my life. I go to therapy, I'm in therapy regularly, and it's something that I committed to, and now I don't miss. And that's the way that I stay accountable. So for me, it's been being able to understand, the same way that I'm talking about the folks that I work with, where do you want to get and what's getting in your way? I had to ask myself, where do I want to get? Like, I love my life. My life is wonderful, but of course there's parts that I would love to be different. So where do I want to get, and what can I do today? And how can I kind of invite other people in to help me stay accountable? Because if left to my own devices, I would like live in this super secretive world that nobody knew anything about. But that causes suffering. And I think that's I think that we need community, and I need community. So that's kind of a new accountability thing that I've learned.
Laura Merrill, I'm so admiring of what you do, and that you sit with people in their darkest moments. And I wonder if your work has changed in any way your views about God, or shaped your views about God, and how so?
Yeah. So that's been, I think, one of the things that I'm the most grateful for, and has been the most fun. I grew up not in the Episcopal Church, and I'm grateful for the upbringing that I had. I was taught at a very young age how it is good to have a Christian community, and it is good to go to church. So I in no way want to downplay that or knock that at all. But the idea that I created for myself of God, coming up, that I've carried with me into adulthood, was a bit scary and a bit punitive, and one that I found it difficult to go to in times of need. And so one of the things that this work has taught me, and again, like I said earlier, kind of I've had this lovely deep dive into the 12 steps, which has been very meaningful, is that it's okay to ask God for what I need. And part of my accountability now has become, I need to bring God into all of it. And it's okay for me to ask for, when I'm struggling, to ask for stamina, or when I'm confused, to ask for guidance. Again, if left to me, I would never ask for anything ever again. So it's a part of my accountability to kind of have this regular prayer and meditation practice in which I, talk and listen and ask and receive. The 12 steps, step 2 talks about, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And I don't think I realized that I didn't believe that, which is a strange thing to kind of admit and acknowledge, being, the age that I am. And I've been in church and, very much a practicing Christian my entire life. It was kind of a shocking thing to be like, oh, wait, it's hard for me to trust. So part of my responsibility, part of my accountability for me is continuing to remember that this is available to me. God is available to me.
You actually said something that in the moment that I heard it shifted the paradigm for me. You called it shame-based accountability, which is punitive and judgmental, and that is a sin for which the church is absolutely guilty. And it plays into this notion that we're supposed to be perfect and that we're not supposed to have flaws, and that when we do something that we later learn to be wrong or unhelpful, that we should be ashamed and that it should cause us great grief. And to an extent, that's helpful. But I think so. The paradigm shift for me was calling it grace-based accountability. I read the other day Russ Levinson, who wrote a wonderful Lenten companion that we followed through the season of Lent, said that a psychiatrist friend of his said that he wishes that every one of his patients could know 2 things. 1, that you're loved no matter what, and 2, that you're forgiven of your offenses. But listening to you, I think the third thing would be you're loved, you're forgiven, and I'm here for you. And just this notion of making space, like that's such a powerful thing and a powerful witness. So I want to just thank you for saying that and for offering that we as the church should be all about grace-based accountability, forgiveness, love, and presence. So I'm grateful for that paradigm shift. I'm curious. So speaking of the church, Laura Merrill, because you have now some pretty extensive experience with addiction and recovery, and Jennifer and I sort of noted yesterday that addiction is something that touches every single person's life in one way or another. How can we, as a member of this church, how do you think we as a church could do better about addressing issues related to addiction?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I think about, not only how do we as a church, but just how do we as people get better at addressing this? And obviously there's no easy answer. I think one of the things that is helpful is if you encounter someone that's experiencing this, or if you encounter a family member, acknowledging it, and maybe, or not maybe, I love to ask, how can I support you? How can I support you? I think that I love when churches host AA and NA meetings. That's a huge service that I know St. Peter's has done, and the hosting the AA meetings. I think that's really helpful. Having resources, having knowledge is power. Being able to when someone comes to you and says, my child is suffering, or my spouse is suffering, or I'm suffering, making sure that you have resources handy for books, for meetings, for therapists, for people that understand the disease. Because I even am still shocked with how little the general public understands the disease of addiction. And it's not on purpose, and it's not malicious, and it's not meant to hurt anybody. It's just, if you don't do the research and you don't learn, it's just hard to understand. So having the resources and being able to give people those resources and kind of pointing them in the direction is helpful. Also, I think, I'm from the Delta, so this is something that's definitely been an interesting thing for me to think about. Let's normalize celebrating without substances. It's a, 90% of the population doesn't have any problems with, drugs or alcohol, and 10% do. So sometimes, I know for myself, the times that have been the hardest for me are the times that I've felt isolated and apart and different. And so I think anything that we can do to continue to say, like, hey, whatever it is that you don't do, we love you. And whatever it is that just, I think that we do a good job of being more inclusive. But like with everything, we could always be better, because humans can always be better.
You were saying that, the general public hasn't done the research about addiction, and yet it touches so many people's lives. Is there one thing in particular, Laura Merrill, that you wish people knew about substance issues?
So I have found the most comfort, and I have found that that people and that family members find a great deal of comfort in looking at this from the lens of the disease model, or even an allergy. I think that sometimes that's even easier for people to kind of wrap their heads around, like, this is an allergy. So getting away from, it's one of those things, like, it might not be your fault, but it's now your responsibility. So kind of, again, with like, let's stop with the shaming of it. This is not, again, this is, I believe in the disease model of addiction, and not everybody does, and that's okay. But that's something that I do wish that people understood a little bit more. And that doesn't excuse unhealthy choices. It doesn't give people a license to kind of run amok, but it does say, this is a thing, and this is a thing that 10% of the people of the population are going to struggle with. And we don't really know what causes it, and there's not really a cure, but these are some things that are helpful.
It seems to me that accountability has at least a little bit, and maybe a lot, to do with awareness. Being aware of and considerate of things that we might not necessarily understand, but that are very much a part of other people's lives, their needs. Mm-hmm. And then taking it one step further in the context of community, being willing to make sacrifices, being willing to give certain things up in the interest of and for the benefit of the other. It's how every marriage, how every good relationship, how every holy friendship works. It's all about compromise and sacrifice. And I appreciate what you said about churches, not just churches, but people figuring out how to celebrate without alcohol. In fact, since I've been here, I've made it a point to not include alcohol in very many of our church functions, just because it's so widely available everywhere else, especially in Oxford, perhaps. And so I do think accountability has at least a little, and maybe a lot, to do with awareness. Kind of, moving away from addiction and back to kind of spiritual practices and your own spiritual disciplines, Laura Merrill. How has your awareness, your spiritual awareness, changed since you've been at St. Peter's, say in the last 6 or so years? Mm-hmm. And what has that done for your accountability here in this place, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So I have fallen in love in a way that I did not expect to, with like the rituals and the traditions, and that it is so easy for me to it's easy for me to zone out and coast and just like not pay attention. I mean, obviously I was like 38 years old before I realized I didn't really trust God. So I can clock out pretty easily. So the rituals and the songs and the things and the practice and the moving, and it's just all so fluid, and I have to pay attention. So it makes me pay attention. And I have found that for me, the more I slow down and the more I pay attention and the more I'm present, that's when I receive the gifts from God. The gifts, they're always there, but I just don't see them because I'm like so spaced out, So it's just, that's been a really beautiful thing. The healing service, especially since we've kind of opened back up, has been something that I just love and look forward to. That has been such a treat. That has been such a delight. The connections group has also been, so nurturing as well, just kind of having a space to go. The I in the beginning, when James and I first started coming so regularly, I was like, it's childcare, like the childcare helps. And then I just have become so grateful for this community of people that are helping me raise my son, which is just so fun. And he loves church, and he loves all of his teachers, and he loves to do a cannonball after communion, jumping down, so he's just, and I'm just so grateful for all of that. And it's helped me, it's moved me from a place of God is up here and God is cold and God is away to God is here with us and God is here with me, and less scary dude in the sky, more like just kind of my friend here with me, encouraging me to do better, but also forgiving me when I don't.
I don't know that I knew it or could have articulated it as such before this conversation, but I mean, it occurs to me that your life is really an example of that sort of grace-based accountability, whereby you receive a gift, you experience God's goodness, and then you open yourself up a little bit more each time and present yourself to God in a more sort of honest and vulnerable way, and then you grow deeper in your relationships to other believers, other practitioners of the faith, and you begin to share and talk about, okay, what is discipleship looking like for you this week? And there's this kind of, I think it's a process. It's a sort of beautiful and fluid process that is so much more compelling to me than that shame-based accountability, and more effective too, if you ask me. I hope that we at St. Peter's will always live into the grace-based model and not the shame-based model.
Mm-hmm. When I went through confirmation at St. James, however long ago, and somebody gave me, St. James in Greenville, and somebody gave me a little book called 50 Reasons to be Episcopalian or 100 Reasons to be Episcopalian. And one that stands out is, if you're tired of hellfire and brimstone, try incense. And that just like stands out as this beautiful, so many of us beat ourselves up regularly. I do. And so again, it's been a refreshing, beautiful, healing and holy thing for me to step into this place of like, God is firm and God is loving and we're all okay.
There's a beautiful line in the prayer that we use at the vigil, which you heard because you were here, which is that it says, O God of unchangeable power and eternal light, look favorably on your whole church, that wonderful and sacred mystery. And then the line that really stands out to me is that let the whole world see that things which were cast down are being raised up, things which have grown old are being made new again, and that all things are being brought to their perfection by him through whom all things were made. So this notion that, things which grew old are being made new, things which were cast down are being raised up, and that all things, including myself, I'm being brought to perfection, which sort of makes me want to say, okay, how do I be a part of that process? How do I surround myself with people to make that movement, happen in a more natural way, and to make myself more aware of it, therefore hopefully more grateful for it. That, I mean, is Jennifer, I don't know, is that accountability?
I think so. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think our wanting to be a part of that being raised up certainly is part of accountability.
And I think that, I was telling a friend this the other day, and she was asking some questions about someone in her life that's struggling, and I can't express my gratitude enough for the people that I'm around that are in long-term recovery, this field, this disease, for as many lives as it destroys, getting to watch people get on the other side it's a miracle. And getting to, it's almost like you can't help but say, like if you watch people go through this, and you watch people that begin to receive the gifts of recovery and live out the miracle, and they they used to be destroying everything, and now they're building things up, and it's just, you watch it and it's like, well, of course. I mean, of course, it's such a spiritual experience, and it's like, of course, it's a spiritual answer and a spiritual process, and it's just, so to be a part of that, I think, and again, kind of going back to accountability as Christians, I think we encourage each other, we build each other up, we nudge each other down the right path, we walk each other home, we do all these things because I think that's why we're here. This is not a lesson that I've enjoyed learning, but this is a lesson that's been meaningful, and that it's along the lines of accountability and responsibility. I am responsible for my joy. I am responsible for my life. I am responsible for living my life. And that's another thing that's really cool to watch other people experience, but it's been a lovely thing that I've experienced, that like, none of this other stuff matters if I don't step up and step into my life and say, like, this is good, and I am good, and things are good. And that's a thing I think that we forget that we are responsible for, or that we are accountable for. No.
That's actually, so for me, and it's probably time to wrap up the conversation, it's a perfect landing spot, because in the last week, I've seen two things. One, on Easter Sunday, we mentioned that it was an incredible experience, and it was probably the most moving Easter celebration for me. But seeing so many people, many of whom I have never met before, come to church. And I have to say that it's not just because that's what you're supposed to do at Easter, but I think that people feel this sort of very deep gravitational pull towards celebrating on days like Easter, because we're inclined towards it. We're I think hardwired to desire community and communal expressions of thanksgiving and praise. And also, I've had in the past 2 weeks, there have been two college students who just randomly, stumbled upon St. Peter's, reached out, came and met with me, which I think for a 19, 20, 21-year-old takes a lot of courage. Mm-hmm. And they've been out of the church, both of them, for several years, quite a number of years in one case, and they're starting to feel this, this longing, this yearning that, again, I think is in every human heart. And we do desire community, we do desire accountability. And at a certain point in our lives, and sometimes it's sooner and sometimes it's later, but we all recognize, oh, you know what? I've got some responsibility here. I've had the gift of an experience. I've had the gift of an encounter, but I've got to pursue this further. I've got to take this next step. And there's so much power in that. And you're right, both in your line of work and in our line of work, it's a blessing to watch it happen and watch it unfold and see people come in. Laura, Merrill, this has been a delight and a joy, and it's always good to see you. And I'm so grateful for the work that you do, which is very important work. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to lift it up for people in our parish to hear and know about. And I hope they'll see you, and whether they've met you or not, approach you and say, hey, I listened to the podcast. Tell me more. Let's get to know each other. Let's be accountable now to each other. What a beautiful thing that would be.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you, Laura Merrill. And I just want to say that it's always a great pleasure to watch James cannonball off the stairs.
For me as well, because he and Stuart are one day apart and often cannonballing together. So we say it and we mean it. All are welcome here at St. Peter's. So come on. Peace, everybody. Blessings on your Easter week. Enjoy this beautiful spring weather. And again, Laura Merrill, thank you. We'll see you in church on Sunday.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Leave us a comment, drop us a line, subscribe, and share with your friends.
If there are topics or guests you'd like us to consider, please let us know.
Thank you for tuning in to On This Rock for the Building Up Church.